Well, let's start off with the unfortunate passing of Afa Anoa'i Sr. Man, there's just been such a rash of deaths of just the past week of Kevin Sullivan and Dennis Brent, and today was Afa Anoa'i Sr., who we had known had been in pretty bad health. He had heart issues this year, needed back surgery. He had gone through pneumonia. I mean, a really rough go of things for him. And this comes just 2 months after his younger brother, Sika, died at 79 years of age. So, of course, you had all these tributes to the Wild Samoans back in June. And I mean, they did run, similar careers, although there were detours here and there where they were not together. But I mean, the two of them together, they got into the industry in the early 70s. Afa came ahead of Sika, but their first big territory was in Stampede Wrestling, and then they traveled all over the place, not just in Canada with Stampede, but across the U.S. in many different territories, including Detroit and Tennessee, Alabama. They went to Puerto Rico later in their careers as well, and over to Japan for IWE, but it was WWWF where they had Afa actually had like 3 separate stints with the company, beginning in 1980 when they won their first of 3 tag titles, and they were one of the stalwart dominant teams of the early 80s period, and would hold the titles 3 different times, and that included losing them on the undercard of that Shea Stadium show that was headlined by Bruno Sammartino and Larry Zbyszko in 1980, and they would leave the company and they went off to Mid-South in 1981. They feuded with the Junkyard Dog there, and then came back to the WWWF, and their last title reign lasted until November of 83 when they lost the belts for the final time to Rocky Johnson and to Tony Atlas. And they continued to work for the company into 1984. And then in early 85, that was the last listed match for Afa. And something that was like that this lawsuit that was filed around this time was in the mid 80s, which was something I had never heard of this lawsuit before. And it was brought to my attention. I actually have to read through more of it. But what happened was the Wild Samoans took a booking right around like early 85 in Kuwait. And this is after WWF had really been using them, but Titan sued them. I should clarify, they sued Afa and Samu, not Sika, but it was Afa and Samu who got sued. And the argument was like, we are their exclusive booking agent, and they took this date in Kuwait, and they took them to court over it. And Afa would not work in the company again until 92 when he comes in with the Head Shrinkers. But what's interesting about that story, and again, I only heard about this for the first time today, is that story was pretty much what they had lifted on Young Rock as the story with Rocky Johnson, which did not really add up as something that had happened, where Rocky Johnson took a date in Saudi Arabia right before the first WrestleMania. And that's the story of Rocky Johnson getting blackballed and not booked on the first WrestleMania because he did the dishonorable deed of taking a booking outside of Vince McMahon. And it's just kind of interesting. Like, you do have, Dwayne Johnson that may have been aware of this story, and that was a idea thrown into Young Rock. But anyway, an interesting one nonetheless. But then Afa comes back to the WWF in 92, and that's his last real run in the company, where he is the manager of the Head Shrinkers, a team name that would probably not be utilized today for your Samoan tag team, but did several matches during this time period when they did 6-mans, or he would sub in. He did some matches when it was the Quebecers and Johnny Polo, aka Raven, which you will see on WrestleMania 10 next week when we review that show. And I mean, the post-wrestling career of Afa, it's all tied to the Wild Samoan Training Center. They ran their own company out of Pennsylvania, and their school produced a lot of wrestlers. As you saw in the video tonight, Dave Bautista being just one of them, but all the Samoan wrestling family members that got in largely went through there, like Mercedes Martinez was, like, there were just a lot of names that came out of that period or that area in Pennsylvania. And then they would move the school to Florida, and they were running that training center up until last month when, Afa's health was just so bad, they shut it down in July. But that's kind of some of the highlights of Afa Anoa'i Sr., who, I mean, WWE did get a video package turned around tonight. And I mean, this is kind of commonplace that even if it's, something breaking late in the day, like they are pretty adamant on getting something onto the show that night. And they did so tonight. And of course, Roman Reigns, who had just lost his father and now losing his uncle, was a very prominent part of tonight's show.